Hello everybody, how are you doing? So over the weekend we had some weather, as we do, because Cape Breton. And while the weather itself was mostly just inconvenient because it meant that I had to shift all my plans for the weekend around and I had to run my errands on Saturday instead of on Friday like I originally planned because the weather outside was really gross. What really made things difficult was the fact that when I walked out of my residence that morning, all of the sidewalks and the roads looked like this. And they looked like that from the time I left campus around 11:30 in the morning to the time I came back to campus for the last time that day at 6:30 in the evening. Now I know it's probably difficult for maintenance to get people to come in over the weekend, but what's really appalling is that for over 7 hours that day, none of the roads and none of the sidewalks were salted or sanded. And don't get me wrong, the sidewalks and streets around town and in downtown Sydney were not very good either, but at least most of them somebody had tried. And I'd had to get on maintenance case before here on CBU campus about this sort of thing because it's just not safe for anybody. Now, as I've probably mentioned before on this channel, my knees aren't very good. Ever since I was very young, I've had issues with my kneecaps dislocating, and because of that, now I have some issues with arthritis. And as I'm sure many other people with arthritis can relate to, I don't maneuver very well when it's cold and slippery outside. Now, going to physiotherapy and getting regular exercises and otherwise just trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle has helped a lot, but even that's only going to be able to do so much when you consider the volatility of Canadian winters and Cape Breton winters in particular. And the thing is, there are other people on campus, whether they are teachers, students, or staff, who have far worse mobility issues than I have. And although they have salted and sanded since then, they haven't really done a very good job. There are still big chunks of sidewalk all over campus where it's really icy, and they haven't even salted or sanded at all in front of the emergency exits in my res. So you walk out of one emergency and right into another when you slip and crack your head open. But mostly it just makes me really angry and disappointed, because the maintenance people have a job, and they aren't doing a very good job, and we depend on them to do that job well so that the rest of us can be safe and lead a happy and healthy campus lifestyle, you know? And when they aren't doing their job properly to make sure that our roads and sidewalks are safe, they are risking everybody who uses campus for anything. That includes the people who just drive out to use the walking trails behind the residence. Oftentimes they have to use our parking lots, or they bring their dogs, or they just walk on their sidewalks on their way in, right? And not everybody here drives safely, and if the sidewalks aren't properly salted and maintained, then they're still at risk of falling and really hurting themselves. In the past week alone, I've seen probably upwards of 4 or 5 people actually slip and fall on patches of ice that haven't been properly salted. Now, as I've said, I've complained about this sort of issue to maintenance before, but if anybody else who uses CBU campus for any reason wants to contribute their opinions, you can find the link to the CBU maintenance page in the description. I almost forgot what it was called for a second. But yeah, bad sidewalks aside, the weather was not very kind to me that day. I was on my feet most of the day, which while it does help with the chronic pain in the long term, it does make my knees stiffen up in the moment, and it got very cold that day, so as you can imagine, the limp in my bad leg was getting rather more pronounced than usual. It's usually not too bad in the warm and the dry, but since it's winter and it's Cape Breton, that's, you know, not a thing. In fact, it actually got to the point where a little old lady tried to help me across the road. I wish I was kidding about that. And so as much as I dislike Cape Breton's winter weather, it does kind of also remind me of what I really do love about the place. Namely, the people. Now, I don't go to downtown Sydney very often. It's kind of a time-consuming venture to get all the way down there. And I have to spend money to take the bus or a cab, and I would just as soon save that money to, like, you know, buy food and supplies and stuff that I need. But I do enjoy going to Sydney's downtown center occasionally, as it's very pretty down there, being on the water, and also it's pretty active as well, despite, you know, the poor economy. Most of all, though, is that the people are really nice. Not that people aren't also nice uptown or on campus where I usually hang out. I just find when you're downtown, you're kind of more likely to run into that almost stereotypical Cape Breton hospitality. Now, it might be hard for anybody who's never met a Cape Bretoner to understand exactly how nice they can be. Like, one guy that day apologized just for walking past me on the sidewalk, and I acknowledge that I'm kind of a slow walker, that I've always been that way, although I'm better now than I used to be. So I don't really mind when people walk past me on the street because I understand that I'm not always the fastest walker, and I try to keep to one side, but on icy sidewalks where I'm trying to navigate to where I can get the most traction, sometimes that's a little bit harder to do. And then he told me to have a wonderful day, which is, you know, that's nice. But really, he had nothing to apologize for. I wasn't like mad or thought he was rude or anything. He was just walking by me on the sidewalk. And then another guy apologized just for being ahead of me in line in Tim Hortons. Like, he was paying for his food when I came in and I walked up behind him in line. He was like, "Oh, sorry, I'll only take a minute." And I'm like, don't worry about it. I've got nowhere important to be. And I know it's like a Canadian stereotype that we're all like really super polite and friendly and full of apologies and all that, but it seems to be especially intense in places like Cape Breton. Not to mention that you can strike up a long conversation with pretty much anyone, anywhere, about anything. And if and when I leave after I graduate, I gotta say, I'm really gonna miss that. Anyway, so that's my thoughts for this week. Thank you guys all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye! What really sucked about the whole thing was that when I finally did get to go out and do my errands, when I walked out of my